everyone, this is the No Pill Man, and today I wanted to make a video on my journey from atheism and communism to Christianity. And I want to talk about how I got there originally when I was born into it, how I left, how I became an atheist, and how I ended up going back. So basically, I was born and raised Roman Catholic originally, and I went to church and I believed in God and I prayed. But I found I didn't really have an understanding of my faith because I was a child. I didn't really have an intellectual apparatus to defend my faith. And because I was always a very intellectually minded, curious person, when I became a teenager and started, using YouTube and stuff like that, I came across the Amazing Atheists YouTube channel, and I started to really agree with a lot of what he was saying. And that really got me to question my beliefs. And eventually I started identifying as an atheist, and I completely rejected Christianity. I thought it was bullshit. I thought it was just a bunch of people who cooked it up to justify, their authority and justify authoritarianism and bigotry. And that was my view for a long time. I really dived into progressive politics. I actually read a copy of the Communist Manifesto from the library, and it radicalized me. Then, from there, I started reading Lenin, and Stalin, Mao, the five heads of Marxism, as they call it, and I came to the conclusion that the theories were sound and the practice was sound. And I don't completely reject it, but my views have become much more nuanced. So basically, as I dove deep into Marxism, I was seeing time and time again that the people who were involved in these movements were not necessarily the nicest people. I realized that a lot of these people were virtue signaling to kind of hide the fact that they themselves weren't the nicest people. And it kind of turned me off of the movement because, well, we're all flawed or we're all sinful. There tended to be a significant lack of self-awareness in these spaces. So after a while, I left these spaces, and I still held on to the convictions, but I just wasn't involved in them anymore. So then what happened was, after leaving, for a while, I started taking political science courses at my university, and we came across, and I started learning about classical political philosophy. So, like Aristotle, Socrates, Plato. And I found myself really resonating with a lot of the things that they were teaching about their beliefs in the greater good and how regime cycling happens. And for those that don't know, one of the early church fathers, I can't remember his name, but he believed that the ancient Greek classical political thinkers were actually kind of anticipations, preambles for Christianity. And I personally hold on to that view. I believe that's true. So that was my kind of gateway drug into Christianity. Um, and my professors, a lot of them were very critical of the empirical method, and a lot of them were very much influenced by the normative method. And they kind of steered me away from the hardline materialism and empiricism that Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, if you want to get specific about it, is based in. And I started to really think about normativism and ideas and ideals, how they exist. So then I took a course on Great Political Questions. I think it was Great Political Questions 3, I could be wrong. And we learned about the work of a man called Agamben, where he talked about bare life and the state of exception. And long story short, I won't get into too much details, but right around that time, I started to become convinced that there was a God. And I had been praying and stuff like that. And that was pretty much it. After and during this time, I had been attending churches, like I had been going to my local Catholic church because I was very lonely, and I still am very lonely, and I was just looking for some sense of community. And even when I didn't necessarily believe in it, I'd still go, and that's kind of a gateway drug. And I've started praying, and now I go. I guess when you go into church, you start sympathizing with the beliefs, and then that sympathy gives over to beliefs till you start to kind of believe in the things yourself. And then I started reading the Bible. Um, and so far, the type of Christianity that most closely resonates with me is Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And I just go to my Catholic church because there's no Eastern Orthodox church in where I live. But my views are more complicated because I don't view the Catholic Church as heretical due to the presence of Eucharistic miracles. So maybe it would be too much of a stretch to call myself an Eastern Orthodox Christian. But I am heavily sympathetic to their beliefs. And I just find that the idea that we're all just material, we're all just byproducts of our objective conditions, that was kind of refuted in my Great Political Questions 3 class because we learned through the studies of synapses in the brain that free will does exist. So if free will does exist, then we can justify morality and holding people accountable for their actions if it's not just material conditions that cause people to behave that way, if there's an element of free will. And that means that the ideal form exists. And if the ideal form exists, the reason why a big reason why Marxists reject philosophical idealism, because taken to its logical conclusion, God exists. And Marxists don't want that, for a mix of much more nuanced reasons than Marxists hate Jesus or something like that. But after I had I now have a very well formulated belief, and very convincing belief that God is real. And that pretty much swept away the last of my atheism. And now I go to church almost every day that it's open. Well, what happens is I have a hard time going on Sunday, because on the previous day, confession starts an hour before church. And then you have the Mass at 4. And after that, I find, because of all the sensory input and all the people, as a person with autism, I find the sensory input overwhelming, so I need more time to recharge, so I end up sleeping in, which makes it difficult to attend Sunday Mass. And I believe, I could be wrong, in Catholicism, I don't think it's a sin to miss Sunday Mass if you go to the Saturday Mass, but I could be wrong. And I go to confession every week. And I read the Bible, and I try my hardest to live, to be a Christ-like person. I'm not perfect, obviously. I can fall short like everyone else does. And that's just standard Christian doctrine. And I don't mean doctrine in a dismissive way. I believe it's true. And it makes me reflect back about how, for certain people, shoving Christianity down their throats doesn't work. For me, at least for me, it didn't. It was something I had to pursue by myself and come up with my own sort of intellectual apparatus to justify my beliefs. Perhaps if I was raised with someone who had a much more sophisticated understanding of the faith, I would have stayed in it. But it was very much like, oh, just believe in it because your parents believe in it, and that doesn't work with me. And there needs to be an effort to I think there needs to be an effort to reach more intellectually minded people when it comes to Christianity. Because as it stands, there's not really much of an effort, and I don't think surrendering the intellectual arena to atheists is necessarily the most productive thing to do. And what attracted me to Christianity is the fact that we all love. The fact that I feel passionate about social justice, and if you actually do your research, you'll find that the church or Christians, just Christians in general, have been at the forefront of a lot of social justice movements. Martin Luther King, with the civil rights movement, Archbishop Oscar Romero is considered highly influential to liberation theology. I do reject liberation theology, but not with the same fervor that a lot of my fellow siblings in Christ do. But yeah, and I still hold on to a lot of my pseudo-communist views. I very much think that the state should take certain measures to make sure that the most vulnerable sections of society are not living in squalor and are living decent lives. Um, I don't like the idea of everyone out for themselves. Fuck everyone else but me. I'm very much a staunch critic of the Protestant work ethic. Um, and the church has played a significant role in assisting the poor, assisting people in destitute conditions, and still does in the modern day. It's very nice. It's very nice to be a part of it. And while I certainly have my critiques of the Catholic Church and I have my issues with how they handle um, the cases of priests abusing children, while that is definitely a problem, I don't think that it fundamentally refutes the church, because the central tenet of Christianity is that people are flawed and people do shitty things. I mean, one of the most important figures in humans in Christian history, the Apostle Paul, originally beheaded Christians and tortured them, if I'm not mistaken. So just because there are priests who are awful, that doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity in and of itself is awful. And I still have my own beliefs I have my own beliefs on criminal justice, reform, and all this other shit that, and economics that would make me quite unpopular among a lot of my siblings in Christ, because I find there's a lot of, I don't mean to sound like a jerk, I think that there's a lot of bootlicking for billionaire oligarchs um, in Christianity, like among a lot of Christians that I see, especially online. And I don't particularly understand how someone who believes that the meek will inherit the earth can reconcile licking the boots of billionaire oligarchs. But that's just me. And I'm more than open to discuss, like, people who are more favorable to free market capitalism who are Christian, my differing views in a civilized way. Um, but yeah. So there are problems, like disagreements that I have with other Christians, but that doesn't mean that Christianity itself is bad. It just means that people believe in certain things within the framework of my faith that I strongly disagree with. Um, Now, I want to be clear. I'm not labeling them like heretics or anything like liberation theologists would do. That's a bit much. But I feel I just would like to see, at the very least, I'd like to see some changes on the views that Christians have in economics. Um, but that's just me. I need to clarify, I am not a liberation theologist. I don't believe that Christians who support free markets are going to burn in hell. Just so we're clear, I just fundamentally disagree with some of my siblings in Christ about certain things. And yeah, that's my video. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.